Hi everyone. So we've talked about how to name all of the angles, and we went through this picture last time in the last video, but now we're going to talk about how we solve for the angles depending on what they look like. So again, these are all the different kinds of angles, and you have a cheat sheet that looks similar to this. What we're going to do with this one though is talk. With all these different angles, you have two options. Option number one is that potentially they could be equal to each other, or the other option is that they could add to be 180 degrees. So we're just going to go through all of the options and decide what they are first before we start going through the examples. The alternate interior angles are equal to each other. If you look, when you have that transversal that goes through the two parallel lines, it usually creates something that has, you can kind of see that there's a smaller version of the angle and a bigger version of an angle. So I know it's going to start to get confusing, but I'm going to use a different color. Let's use this bright blue color. And the smaller angles are usually less than 90 degrees. So like this is considered a smaller angle. This is considered a smaller angle. This one's a smaller angle, and this one's a smaller angle. And then the other is that you have I'm gonna use this color. The bigger angle. So the bigger angles would be like this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. And remember, the smaller angle is less than 90, which means the bigger angle is greater than 90. And so if you have two of the smaller angles when you're naming them, or two of the bigger angles when you're naming them, then they have to be equal to each other. So an alternate interior angle, you have two of the smaller angles, which means that they're equal to each other. And then the same thing goes for the alternate exterior. In the alternate exterior, we also named two of the smaller angles, so they're equal to each other. And this goes for all alternate exterior angles and all alternate interior angles. Corresponding angles are also equal to each other. And in our example, let's see, the corresponding, we decided the two smaller angles as well. The consecutive interior, if you notice, one of our consecutive interiors is on this angle, and then the other is over here on this angle. So we have one pink and one blue arrow. In that case, because they're different colored arrows, then instead of being equal, they add to be 180. 180 degrees, I should clarify. Your vertical angles are equal to each other. And then adjacent angles, the ones that are right next to each other that create that straight line, those add to be 180 degrees. All right, so now that we have all of that, what we can do is use that information to solve for different things. Let's start going through the examples. So the first example, you have, again, your transversal and two parallel lines, and the goal is to find what the question mark is equal to. So in the question mark, for the first thing to do on these ones, I think is easiest is to actually name the angle. So based on what we talked about in the last video, these angles are alternate interior angles. Because I know these are alternate interior angles, I'm going to look at my alternate interior line, and it says that they're equal to each other, which means that the question mark is equal to 103 degrees. And that is my answer. Easy enough. Okay, so for the second example, again, we're going to start by naming these angles, and these, based on what we learned in the last video, are vertical angles. And vertical angles, if we look back up here, are equal to each other. So I can say 8x plus 3 is equal to 11 plus 7x. And now I can just solve it like a normal equation for x. So to solve it like a normal equation, I'm going to subtract 7x from each side to get the x's on the same side. The 7x's cancel out on the right side. And we have 8x minus 7x over here, which just gives me 1x, or x plus 3 is equal to 11. Then I want to get the x by itself by subtracting 3 on each side. And the 3's cancel out on the left side. We're left with x is equal to 8. And that is my answer. Because on this one, we're just solving for x. Okay. And then for the next example, I know I have it written in blue. That I screwed that up. It should all just be white. So all of that blue should not be there. And once again, we're going to name the angle first before we solve for x. So these angles, because they're right next to each other on the insides, they are called consecutive interior angles. And consecutive interior angles are one of those ones that add up to be 180. So we're going to say x plus 57 plus x plus 131. So just add both chunks together. It has to be equal to 180. Now we're going to simplify by combining like terms. We have x and x, which gives us 2x. And then 57 and 131. I'm going to plug that into my calculator and get 188 equals 180. And now we just solve for x. So I'd subtract 180 from each side. Or sorry, 188 from each side. The 188 cancels out on the left side. I'm left with 2x is equal to negative 8, because 180 minus 188 is negative 8. Then we're going to divide each side by 2, and we end up with x has to be equal to negative 4. And that would be my answer. Totally okay to have an x that's equal to a negative number. What's not okay is if you get an angle equal to a negative number. Something got screwed up if that happens. Okay, and then this last example, what we're going to do is they want us, instead of solving for x, they want us to solve for x. Well, they still want us to solve for x, but then what we're going to do is use that x to solve for the bolded angle. In this case, it's that 10x. I highlighted it in blue for us. So we're going to do it the same way, though. We start it the same way. So we're going to look at, well, what do these two, how do we name these two angles? These, because they're right next to each other on opposites of the line and they make a straight line, these would be adjacent angles. And adjacent angles are something that add to be 180 degrees. So we're going to just add both of the chunks. Negative 6 plus 21x plus 10x has to be equal to 180 degrees. Then we're going to combine like terms. We've got a 21x and a 10x, which gives me 31x. And then the negative 6 doesn't have anything in common, so we just leave it as minus 6 is equal to 180. Now to solve for x, we would add 6 to each side. So now we've got 31x is equal to 186. And then we're going to divide each side by 31 to get rid of that 31 and get the x by itself. So now we've got x by itself. And then let's plug that into a calculator. 186 divided by 31 gives me 6. So I know that x is 6. Now, if it was asking me to solve for x, I would be done. But in this case, it's not asking me to solve for 6. It's asking me to figure out what this angle is, or my bolded angle is. So now that I know that x is equal to 6, what I'm going to do is plug it into that angle, which is 10x. So I can rewrite it as 10 times 6 because I know x is equal to 6, which gives me 60. So my answer is 60 degrees. That angle has to be equal to 60 degrees. And there we have it. That is how we solve for angles.